that time I was about 7 months pregnant and scared because we didn't know what these people were going to do next. As days went on, they got more and more vociferous and more badly behaved, and they started breaking showcases and pelting things, and they would end up in South Key. They broke the police barricade, got up the staircase, and came through our offices to get back down to the Canadian High Commission. And when our directors realized what was going on, went to the vault and handed out guns, revolvers, to our staff. Well, I think that's the most frightening moment of my whole life, because I saw my colleagues looking at this gun, turning it over in their hands and saying, what the hell do I do with this? I don't know what was more frightening, the Black Power movement or the staff with guns that they didn't know what to do with.
In 1970 now, JCs was targeted. They were on Melville Lane, and we decided to, in the night, right, set off a bomb, blowing away part of the building. Right? That was the symbol of that kind of white power structure. So that is what. And I remembered we built a small bomb, a grenade, and hand grenade, in a Milo tin. See? And we were leaving to go and set it off when a squad car swung, just swung around the corner. And knowing what you were doing, it certainly, pulled it back. So we threw it under a step in a yard.
We felt we were being unjustly targeted, yes, because after all, we were Trinidadians. Okay. And those who were in business then, had been educated and lived all their lives in Trinidad. Very few were foreigners. It was all Trinidadians that had grown up and was participating in the business community. And we employed thousands of people of all colors and of all class. And in the history of a country, 8 years is a very short period. You can't overnight, suddenly turn staffs into Negroes and Indians and so forth. You have people working there that you have to wait for retirement age and different things to happen before they can be replaced.
They did attack the symbols of success. So if they saw successful businesses on Frederick Street and they were certainly not black owned, there was resentment. I think I understand the resentment. I think I understand why people of that particular community felt the way they did. Obviously, I feel a certain degree of sympathy with the elements in the society, the minorities, who became inadvertent targets through no fault of their own. I think minorities tend to try and go with the flow, stay below the radar, try to make a living, educate their children, keep them safe, that sort of thing. I think the Black Power uprising of 1970 threatened that stability.
I was concerned, and what fueled that was a lack of information. There was enormous amount of rumor which was not countered by good information, so that you never knew what to believe. And not knowing, you became worried and scared in some cases. I had nowhere to go. I was not accustomed to any unrest in my life. I had no money outside of Trinidad. I had no job outside of Trinidad. So there was no escape route for me. I was fixed there in Trinidad. And like so much of the population, I thought I was born here, I would live here and die here. I mean, there were some ugly incidents. People calling you a white cockroach and a honky is not pleasant.
the Syrian Lebanese community, the Chinese community, the minority communities, we're all cockroaches. And as they say, cockroach have no right in foul cock business. The two big foul cocks are the two tribes, the major tribes in the country.
There was a lot of demands, especially from the business community, that the Prime Minister do something about it, crack down on this thing because it is getting out of hand. And then Williams didn't do anything. As a matter of fact, he kept complete silence, as usual, very aloof from the whole thing.
Why didn't he do something? Why didn't he stop the demonstrations? Why wasn't he speaking? Well, it was not Eric Williams's habit to overspeak like we do so well in the Caribbean. When he did speak, people listened. And also, he was not unmindful of the fact that if he were to stop the demonstrations, he would create martyrs of the demonstrators. So the hope was that it would play itself out and sort of peter out.
Williams was in fact saying, look, Black Power, I understand it, I sympathize with it if it means A, B, C, and D. If, however, it means Molotov cocktails and violence and attacks on whites, attacks on Indians, etc., that is not my version of what Black Power involves.
He was in control. And when people wanted him to move fast on this or that or the other, his favorite phrase, he said, "We never shoot until you see the whites of their eyes." That is a man in complete and total command of the situation. And his letters to me bear it out. And then you had the trade unions taking advantage of a situation, seeing the unrest in the country.
The WASA workers were on strike, and you had bus workers about to go on strike. Something that would have been very frightening for the government of the day is that telephone company workers had called us in as well, and they were going to go on strike. So you'd have had the sugar workers coming up, the WASA workers would have joined them, and would have come into town to join with the bus workers, telephone company workers, and there were a lot of efforts being made to organize in oil. Maybe the most worrying part of it was the sugar workers for the government. It was a moment the government was worried about, and they didn't know who they could trust.
The opponents of Eric Williams, all naturally taking advantage of this period of unrest, this very visible and noisy period of unrest. So it was a confluence of events. I remember my father writing to me saying, this was in April, that if there is one more demonstration, this thing has gone on long enough, and if there is one more demonstration, we will call a state of emergency, and that was indeed done.
And on the morning of April 21st, Williams declared a nationwide state of emergency with a curfew, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And all the main players in the Black Power movement were arrested. The square, you can't gather anymore. It's a state of emergency, you know. At one point in time, the police were chasing people out of the square, and opposite the Red House, this policeman and his companion came into the square. One had a gun in his hand, and the other policeman had what looked like a bull pistol or a whip or something. And of course, when he pointed the gun at the young Black Power boys, they would freeze, and this policeman would hit them with the whip on their backs, you know. That made me very angry. Because these guys are unarmed, you know, they're not threatening the police. What are you doing? And I saw Superintendent Ramdua, I think he was at the time, coming through the other entrance of the square. So I walked up to him and I said, you know, your men are beating people in here indiscriminately. And he looked at me, you know, I was, of course, dressed in a white shirt, a tie, you know, clean trousers. And he looked at me and said, they won't hit you. And at that moment, I had a kind of identity crisis. I realized I was perceived by the authorities as a nice little white boy. You know, I wasn't a threat to them. It made me very, very angry. And I think from that point on, my writing probably became colored by subjectivity.
Well, I had to stay in Central because the emergency was declared. You couldn't be on the road after 6. And they had an edict over the year that I'm to be arrested. And on the 4th day, I made a decision, hearing the almost about 90% of the leadership was already arrested. I decided I had to reach North Trinidad because that is where the organization was exceptionally strong. And I could have conducted a fight from the north. They wanted to search me all the time, you know. And they had a broadcast saying anybody from harboring me would be charged, I think it's $5,000 or $25,000. You know, what happened? It was 4 of us. And I gave instruction that nobody is to enter any parlor, any shop, or anything like that. But one of the brothers, because the 4 days we have eaten, right? And he saw a little parlor, and he went in the parlor to buy some biscuits. We were still in African garb and that type of thing, so it was easy to recognize him in the Indian area. And the police moved in and caught us.
I was at home. I had not been home for quite a number of nights before that because we were getting all these signals that the state of emergency was coming. And I took the chance, and about 4 o'clock in the morning, I heard a loud knock on the door, and I knew for sure that that was the police. They took me in the car. They said, "We have instructions to pick you up." I said, "Where are you all taking me?" I said, "We can't tell you." But we were all cool. We chatted, no handcuffs, no nothing. Sat in the car with them, and we chatted and discussed the politics on the way down. Then went to Stobles, where the Coast Guard is located. They didn't have a clue about the emergency. It hadn't been declared yet, and nobody had communicated. They didn't even know I was being brought down there, or anybody was being brought down there. So I witnessed all that pandemonium. So these guys with their guns surrounded us, and they were very tense. We were relaxed, they were tense, you know, and that makes things dangerous because men with guns who tense, those very light triggers. But what gave the morning some excitement is that at some point we heard a car like racing coming towards the Coast Guard and coming from the direction of Army headquarters, and we could see through the window. And there was this red sports car coming screaming up the road, screeching through to the gate of the Coast Guard. That's how we knew there was trouble in Tetron, because he was fleeing from something.
April 21st, 1970 was a very traumatic day in my life, and one that I'm sure I will never forget until the day I die. And as is commonly known, that was the day of the Army mutiny in Tetron. I arrived there at about 4 or 5 in the morning, where most strange events were taking place. And the day started off in a very unusual manner, in which I was put in a classroom and told that I was in charge of about 12 or 13 detainees who were very agitated and very abusive to me. But we had our orders, and I had to do what I was told. Subsequent to that, they were led away, put aboard a ship, and in fact taken to Nelson Island.
We had about over 300 men there at the time. About 200 were loaded onto the vehicles. I addressed the men before and told them that we are going in convoy order. You're not to interfere with anybody, not the civilians, nobody.
The call was made for the Trinity to go to sea, and I took the ship about 300 yards off, and then the convoy started to come down the hill. We had put, because we knew what was going on, we had put a bus across the roadway to stop any convoy going out, and then a lot of rubble and stuff to stop vehicles from passing.
It was easily shoved aside, by which time the Trinity had gone back out. The Colon Bay was at Stobles Bay, right sitting virtually a couple 100 meters below us. We were at the top of the hill in the Crow's Nest area, and the Coast Guard was firing away, hitting either below or above us.
We were shouting and trying to say who's in charge there. You cannot proceed any further. What we got in return was a hail of gunfire, and bullets were hitting the water all around the ship. It is, in fact, now looking back, it was an amusing moment, because the coxswain of the ship, who stands next to the captain, was standing next to me, and I said, "What a terrible morning for rain to fall." And he just looked at me and he says, "That's not rain, so we better get out of here." And so we weren't firing at them at all. We were firing above the hillside to impress upon them, "Look, you better go back to Tetron, this has to stop." And indeed they did so. Unfortunately, and we only learned this after that, one of the soldiers was seriously wounded by a piece of shrapnel that hit a rock and flew back and hit him.
But we knew Bailey was dead. His head was mashed up. They had to bandage it around on this way and that way to hold his skull together. He was bleeding through the eye, the nose, the ears, everything. He was for a little while and then nothing. That's all he could. He couldn't speak, just groan. After you just see where you relax. You relax and you know that was it.
We gave orders for the ambulance that was accompanying the convoy to take them immediately to Port of Spain Hospital, which it did.
Even as a young officer, and even in all of that excitement, you can't shoot at an ambulance. And the moment the ambulance came on the scene, I had to cease fire. And the ambulance, with siren blazing, went down and went past Stobles Bay up to Port of Spain. Lots of things came to light after this incident, and one of the things I learned that they had a whole bunch of arms and ammunition in the ambulance.
Lieutenant Lassalle knew that I wasn't going to the hospital directly, that I had my block and I had arms and ammunition in the ambulance. It was loaded. There were 4 or 5 cases of rifle. That could be about 50 or more rifles, ammunition, grenades. And I was going to arm my block. That is Alfred Richards' scheme.
In fact, if there's one hero of 1970, it's that young soldier that lost his life. Because it's just him falling that day must have created a terror and a feeling that this was real and caused the whole thing to fizzle. And I think he may have died, but he was the hero of that morning, because he caused everybody to rethink what they were doing.
The big question that arose at that point was, do we return fire on the Coast Guard? And I could tell you, men were bristling. They wanted to return fire because by now the troops' adrenaline was flowing.
When they said not to fire, you see the troops, you could see the morale in the troops drop. The rifle feel like a piece of old iron in your hand, useless, because you can't fire. And from that point, soldiers started to drift away, leave the convoy, walk back to camp, started to take to the hills and all this kind of way. At that point, we knew that was the end of that.
We said, listen, if we shoot at that Coast Guard boat, we're going to blow it out of the water. If we blow that boat out of the water, all those people on that boat are going to die. We didn't know how many people were on the boat, but we knew it would be at least 40, 50 people on that boat. They were going to die. If we do that, we then have to shoot the other boat and the Coast Guard headquarters. People are going to die. Where will this end? It's bloodshed. Once bloodshed starts, you don't know where it's going to end. And initially, our intention was there was to be no bloodshed. So even though some soldiers were demanding that we return fire, as the 2 officers in charge and the other soldiers there, we decided against it. And we said, let us return to Tetron and we'll take it from there.
There's this story that I have heard and indeed read, that the hillside came down and stopped the convoy. And that story has no basis in fact whatsoever. And that's because the 40mm Boffa is an anti-aircraft weapon. And the ammunition that it uses has a grazed nose fuse on the end. And it's designed to hit an aircraft and explode right away. And so it doesn't pierce anything. And when they were hitting the hillside, they're incapable of piercing the rock and bringing hillside down. The convoy stopped because we had put a bus across the road and they simply couldn't pass. They had to physically later manhandle the bus, a lot of them jump in it, as you would a car that's blocking the road, till get the ambulance to pass.
As for the Coast Guard bringing down the hillside onto the roadway, that again is another myth in the imagination of certain people. The critical thing that stopped us was that decision as to whether we are going to return fire, whether there's going to be bloodshed or there will not be bloodshed. And we certainly weren't the kind of people about to kill ordinary people, to kill even the Coast Guard men. We weren't like that. We knew those men. They were our friends who were on those boats. There was no way we were going to shoot to kill them. It was not unanimous, I should add.
If the army had come into Port of Spain in any way, they would have been like the leadership at that moment, seeing that the rest of the leadership was either captured or in hiding, or let's say the known civilian leadership then. And so that could have changed the whole dynamic at the time, depending on how the army officers decided they would play it. Whether they'd say, well, okay, let's use our power now to pull, this thing together. Or let's decide why share power, And of course, if that scenario had played out, then you'd have had a whole other round of struggle. Because let us face it that Macandal Dagger, Geddes Granger at the time, was the person that people saw as their leader. And anything without him was doomed to failure.
As a senior member in this conspiracy, I sit down with him last year and Shah and others to sit down and actively plan it. That hardcore group was maybe about 10 soldiers, maybe if as much, maybe about 6 civilians. That was the nucleus, the hardcore center doing the actual planning. Most of them were Trinidadians, late, middle 20s, so one was a journalist. One was, I don't know what his job was. I think he wrote too. He's a writer, but not for papers and so. One was a university student. He never impressed me. He liked this kind of grand charge thing and wearing a big sombrero like Viva Zapata. He wasn't impressive. Yeah, we met somewhere in Chaguanas area, middle, with a little house. It's not the residence of anybody, it seems. Just a little room, just big enough. The neighbors a little distance off. It was in the night too. Rafiq Shah did the introductions. This so-and-so from this union. This one is so-and-so a writer, and this kind of way. He did the introductions. And what's it not? And then we kind of talk casually. It wasn't a thing. To see that, what we think about Cuba, what we think about Fidel, what we think about Shea and this kind of way. Trying to feel us out to see if we, at least in agreement, politically, if you're of the same political persuasion, more or less. That is it.
We could create something new. We were quite capable of creating a new society that did not have to be a communist society, but yet it could be a revolutionary society.
We were to seize power and introduce us to these people who would set up the government, whether they hold elections or whatever they want to do. We didn't go into that detail. But these were the political people, and they would see about that part, setting up a government and what's it not. We were just the force, the army, to take over and hold military power, control, whether you arrest the police or whatever you have to do. Well, I think in the last meeting there, that might be early April, we started to talk about the different tasks. Myself, a particular civilian, he's a unionist, and some other soldiers, we were supposed to see about police headquarters and try to arrest borrowers. That was the job they gave me. Other groups, the airport, the radio station, TV station, different groups doing different things. Some to go on the block and arm the block, control the fellas on the block, so I had to give them some kind of training. Initially, the first thing, how to operate the weapon, and how to shoot and whatnot. Later on, well, then we'll induct them into the army in uniform and all this kind of way. But
There we were, soldiers armed to the teeth and with every imaginable weapon you can think of, with the destructive power to virtually wipe out the government, wipe out anything that stood in our way. And we didn't, because we valued human life above everything else.
There is no question about any threat, no question whatsoever. And the people who, this really makes me very angry, because this is personal. This is my dad. This is his life. And it was my life, because I wasn't letting him go down without me.
Rafik Shah had something, a toughness about him. And his man and the way we walk and he look and so. You could see him as a soldier then, you know, and the way we talk. If Rex LaSalle wasn't there, was a different person, we'd reach in town, and it would have gone further than it really did.
And when I arrived in Trinidad and Tobago, I drove in a car from Piarco with people in the car with subloading rifles, SLRs, pointing out the window. That was a joke? There's no joke. I stayed locked in my house for 3 months, not able to move out. That was no joke. And that makes me very angry. Don't try to change history. We all know the history. There's some of us still alive today that know the history. And when when we would hear that the rebels were coming and there were more threats, remember, I think I was asked whether arms were smuggled out, let's say, from Tetron and brought into Port of Spain. We know that the Coast Guard stopped the army, the regiment in their tracks. We know that. But there had to have been some threats within Port of Spain, because there were many times even after that where everyone was alert in my house, the Prime Minister's residence, and there were people literally sleeping on the stairs at the entrance to my father's bedroom. And in fact, when I arrived, I was not allowed to sleep in my own bedroom because it was easier to protect one room than two. So I slept with my dad. He had 2 beds in his room. And I remember the first night, I asked for a .38 special revolver, and I got it. Had no clue how to use it, but these people gave one to me, because I was the last line of defense. I was in my father's room. And the first night I got it, I thought to myself, you know, when I don't wear my glasses, I can't hear while I see. So I had to sleep. I slept with my glasses on all night. Because if they were to break in that room, how the hell am I going to shoot someone if I can't hear and I can't see without my glasses? I slept with my glasses on. I was 19 years old. I've never even told, well, no, I shouldn't say I've never told the story, but I've certainly never told it publicly.
There were some pictures on the wall in the Sergeant Mess. I think it was Williams, the Governor General, and the Queen. They mash up the Governor General picture and they mash up the Queen picture. But they didn't touch Sheriff Williams' picture. They leave it. I think one fella said, just turn it over to face the wall, you know. But from ever since, even when we were planning, he was always what to do with Dr. Williams. Nobody wanted that job to arrest him or anything. I don't know what they eventually would have done. They would have had to put him under house arrest or something.
Certainly, there were people who were trying to unseat him. There's no question about that. I mean, they were trying to overthrow him. And as far as the revolutionaries, the army was concerned, they promised to string him up in the very Woodford Square where he brought public education to the people.
We never discussed any plan to assassinate anybody or anything like that. We, more or less, if we came in town and we had thought we'd have to deal with the police, if they shoot at us, we'd shoot back. But we never had any plans to put no minister on no wall or no big capitalist against no wall and shoot him. We never had any kind of plans like that. We never think.
There was threats, there were rumors, there were all sorts of things that went up that shouldn't have happened. You know. But it's Trinidad. The rumor is king in Trinidad. You know, when it comes to that. I mean, a rumor would start with somebody on a street corner, move from there to the police, move by radio from the police to me as a serious threat, or through my commanding officer you know, on the ships, but eventually reached me as a very serious threat. You know, look out tonight. Tonight there's going to be an invasion by Cubans and all, you know, all that sort of thing, you know.